Alright, so now we're going to discuss the Controlled Substances Act for the state of Indiana. And as I tried to intimate at the beginning of this program, this is an interactive pharmacy law review. And so what I meant by that was it's not going to be straight lecture, as I indicated earlier. And during this segment, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on it for a variety of reasons. Number one, there have been so many changes and updates, not only with obviously two major changes that I'm sure you can think of with regards to the federal law in controlled substances and rescheduling of certain drugs, but then also with regards to how the states have reacted as in response to those changes. Some states were required to rewrite some of their laws just because of the way that their laws read previously, and their laws were not in accordance with the federal law. And other states felt it necessary to add additional stipulations and whatnot. Here we're going to go over the federal law changes and address those. As some of you may have noticed, in certain pharmacies, especially with big box pharmacies and whatnot, you may have seen some changes already in terms of how the pharmacies are practicing to try to get ready for some of the big changes that are coming and some that have already come. And we will touch on that a little bit. During this portion of the review, I will also be going through a few case scenarios that touch on the stickier subjects that we really all hate to think about as pharmacists, pharmacy students, pharmacy technicians, clinicians, whatnot. And that's with regards to drug diversion. And I will be putting some scenarios before you and walking you through the cases, but then allowing you some time to think about how you would approach those particular situations. Now, while there are not necessarily black and white answers, obviously some answers are more correct than others. Some answers are more justifiable than others, perhaps. There's a fine line in certain cases, and in other cases there are gray areas. So what I'm going to do is present the scenarios, and then I'll give you some time to think about it, come up with your own solution, and then I will give you some ideas as to how to think about it, or just some considerations with regards to how to approach the different situations. But bear in mind that while, again, as I said earlier, some answers might be more correct than others, certain things are very black and white and other things are not. So I'm just giving you some examples and some potential solutions as suggestions as in terms of how to approach these situations. But don't assume that just because I said I would do XYZ, that my answer is 100% correct, and that if you chose or anticipated taking a different route, that your answer is wrong, because perhaps maybe your answer is a better solution. And we all have different experiences. We all bring something different to the table. And as a pharmacist, you are going to be placed in a lot of situations, oftentimes on a daily basis, that you may not find the most comfortable. But with time and experience, you will develop your own style if you haven't already, and I'm sure you are already developing your own style and how you want to operate. And a lot of things, or a lot of techniques or tactics that you use as a practicing pharmacist will be more than just operating from black and white, but the judgment call. And with the drug diversion, even though the laws don't necessarily state that certain things are illegal, there are certain things that you should do or should try to avoid, or certain practices that may not be bad ones to incorporate as a means of doing your due diligence and protecting yourself as a practicing pharmacist, and eliminating suspicion in terms of how you're practicing if for whatever reason you were coming into question. By the same basis, a bit of advice I would like to share is obviously to not make the patient feel like a victim, and view every situation as different, because as we all know, pain is different. Therapeutically, pain is difficult to treat if we're looking at pain management, for example. And as a result, you know, if we're looking at these different pain scales on a scale of 1 to 10, my 10 for pain may be different than your 10 versus the colleague sitting next to you. So let's try to keep all of that in mind and realizing that each situation is different. Okay, so before we jump into the Controlled Substance Act and discuss updates and walk through some case scenarios and whatnot, I'm going to start off this section by discussing narcotics. I'm going to start that off by defining specifically what is a narcotic. You might be thinking to yourself, well, goodness, Dr. Wiley, why are we going to discuss the definition of a narcotic? I'll tell you why. We're going to discuss it right now because I cannot tell you how many educated medical professionals, how many pharmacists, how many doctors, even I've heard some people from the Drug Enforcement Administration. I hope they don't come get me for that, but I've heard different people who you would think would address them as otherwise, referring to certain substances as narcotics when in fact they are not. Okay, I'm going to say this, and after I explain specifically what narcotics are, I'm going to come back to it. All narcotics are controlled substances, but not all controlled substances are narcotics. So that said, by definition, narcotic is a substance that is directly related to or a form of an opiate-containing substance, which would include modifications and derivatives thereof. Now, there is an exception to this, and that would be isoquinoline-based alkaloids that are actually derived from opium. An example drug of that would be the muscle relaxant pipervine, okay? So that is a drug that's used to relax smooth muscles, and it is derived from opium, but it doesn't have some of these same addictive type properties. The mechanism of action is different, obviously, and that is the reason why that is not considered a narcotic. But in general, other than that, anything that is derived from some sort of opium or something with an opiate base will essentially be classified as a narcotic substance.